Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary, making an exciting announcement for all listeners and readers. Our own Abe Greenwald, whom I will introduce soon, has begun providing us with a daily newsletter. We've had a Commentary Magazine and commentary.org newsletter for many years with links to things that are produced on the website and in the magazine and to the podcast on a daily basis for years. But beginning last week, Abe has begun providing a kind of daily essay perspective newsletter that we heartily advise you to subscribe to. The subscription is free. If you go to commentary.org and you look at the top banner, you will see in the middle where it says subscribe, donate, you will see newsletter. Click on the word newsletter. It will ask you just simply for your email address and your name, and then you can subscribe. And around 4:30 in the afternoon every day, but the weekends, you will get the Abe Greenwald Commentary Daily Newsletter, including links to articles and blog posts of interest and to this podcast, which you probably won't need since you're already subscribing, but a bunch of people do listen to the podcast through the link in the newsletter, and we will be providing that as well. So that is the Commentary Magazine Daily Newsletter, now featuring Abe Greenwald at commentary.org. Please go to the top banner, click on newsletter, and subscribe. And here he is, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John. Thanks for the word.
There we go. And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
I don't really care what's happening because as we record, the Oscar nominations are being announced, and I would really rather be watching those because I want to get angry at the nominations for Emilia Perez, a disgraceful and awful movie that's going to get a lot of nominations. But I can't because I have to be here with you. So I hope you appreciate the sacrifice that I am making to discuss with you such matters as immigration, the status of Trump nominations, and worldwide anti-Semitism. So from the ridiculous to the sublime, here we go. Lot of stuff going on in immigration. Announcements that 350 people have been deported, or either taken by ICE and deported or whatever. 1,500 troops going to go to the southern border, though it's not clear where, what role they will play, or how. Many local officials across the country in sanctuary cities and places of clueless leftist psychosis were announcing their intention to disrupt ICE efforts to enforce federal immigration laws in their cities, with the mayor of Denver, for example, last week saying that somehow the police would prevent ICE. The local police were going to be directed to prevent ICE or to somehow interpose their bodies between ICE and people that ICE was moving on. To which apparently the Trump administration of the federal government vowed to potentially take action because the courts the courts have affirmed the fact that immigration is a national responsibility, that border security is a national responsibility under the National Security Act of 1952, and that this is a federal responsibility. It is not something that the states and localities have the power to manage or interfere with. So this is moving on a very, very fast track. And
we also have our first federal case from four attorneys general challenging the birthright citizenship declaration. Attorneys general from Washington, Oregon, Arizona, and Illinois have filed in federal court in Seattle questioning whether the birthright citizenship executive order. So another piece of the puzzle moving quickly.
So can I tell a quick story and then ask you guys to respond to my idea about what is going on inside the sort of left liberal head? About 25 years ago, I was at 27 years ago, I was at a dinner party in New York City, at which there were many, 20 people around the table, but there were mostly sort of like Democratic donor types at the table, and the conversation came up about Hillary Clinton, who was running for the Senate in New York, and I said that aside from everything else I did not like about her, I found this very disturbing because it was like a kind of affirmation that Hillary and Bill had a devil's bargain, that she was going to back him, support him, and then the minute that she could find a way to seize independent power, she would use his standing, her standing, to do so by carpetbagging, coming to my state and running for office. And this guy across the table from me looked at me, absolutely like the color drained from his face, and he said to me, "You can't say that." And I said, what do you mean I can't say that? I just said it. I just said it. So this comes to mind because there is about the response to Trump on immigration from the Denver mayor or whoever. You can't do that. And that Trump and having run on immigration as hard as anybody has ever run on any issue ever, and having poll numbers that show that 50, 60, 70% of the American people, depending on how you ask it, have now come to the opinion that all illegal immigrants should be deported from the United States. All. I'm not saying some. I'm not saying, you know what, I really like my gardener. I want my, I need my grapes picked. They really make a wonderful.
Can I interrupt you?
Wonderful. Yes.
How many people have gardeners? Anyway, this is
I don't know.
Christine talked about this yesterday about kind of the classism embedded.
Every Californian.
Every Californian, it's true. Every Californian and a lot of people in Nevada, a lot of sort of like retirees in Nevada and Arizona and places like that where gardening is difficult because they're deserts and you need to.
I think Abe is right. I think it's a Hollywood liberal thing. It's like, oh, my gardener.
East Hampton.
Or an East Hampton liberal.
Cape Cod. Okay, I mean, these places, people have they have these giant hedgerows, right? 10-foot high bushes that need to be constantly kept in order. Otherwise, your house starts looking like, the Addams Family mansion. So I don't know. Anyway, I'm sorry to go with Gardner. That was maybe.
Well, but you're repeating the arguments that you hear from liberals opposed to Trump's immigration policy. And I think you hit on the key difference between what's happening over the past 48 hours and what happened during the 4 years of the first Trump administration, and that's public opinion. Public opinion is now firmly on Trump's side on this issue. He campaigned on immigration both times. It is his signature issue, as you say. But when he took office the first time, we all recall, the public was against him. They didn't, even on the question of the wall, something that had enjoyed broad public support prior to 2016, the public turned against building the wall. Now, because of the failures of the Biden administration, Trump is enjoying the wind at his back as he embarks on this anti-illegal immigration campaign. He also did close some avenues of legal migration as well. The asylum program has been halted. But there too, I think he'll enjoy some public benefit of doubt, suspension of doubt here. And that's what Democrats haven't really reckoned with, this shift in public opinion that is now firmly on the side of Trump.
And there's also, he's got the Lake and Riley Act now on his desk to sign from Congress. And I really don't think the public opinion piece is settled in on the left, the sort of open borders left. And Matt's absolutely right to cite it. people will give him a lot of benefit of the doubt, because if you, even when, you see the reaction to the news stories come out saying, well, he's going to deputize, marshals and other DEA agents to have enforcement powers for immigration. This is horrifying. And everyone sort of shrugs and goes, well, that's great. Actually, unlike this sort of existential wall building that he talked about in his first term, he's deputizing people. There's manpower now behind his actions, and things are happening quickly, and people see it on the news. And they don't mind it. And I think that's where the disconnect really is, not just with the sort of progressive elite left, but also with the media, who doesn't really know yet how to cover this story, because it is coming from several angles. The way they covered the Laken Riley Act was interesting to me, because none of them wanted to talk about who Laken Riley was and what had happened to her. And so that was actually a very good, and the fact that a couple of Democrats came across the aisle and signed onto that bill as well. So he should use each of these opportunities to remind the public, this is a serious issue. This is why you elected me. I am getting things done from, starting at day one. And I think he'll lose the birthright citizenship argument. I think he'll lose things here and there in the courts. But for now, he's kind of asking for forgiveness, not permission from the public.
Well, I mean, two things. One of which is birthright citizenship goes to an idea about what America is, what kind of country America is, as well as to precedent and what the 14th Amendment says and all of that.
Well, and the practical challenge, if you have an infant who isn't a citizen and two parents who are here illegally, everyone's going to get deported. Or if they are a citizen, what happens to the parents? I mean, right. They're practical challenges.
I'm not saying it's not but I'm saying that there, even though it really does involve human beings and there's something abstract about it, it's more an argument about what America is in its third, as we approach its, triennial, I mean, the 250th birthday. I'm sorry. What we have here is that public opinion has changed because the facts on the ground inside the United States have changed. There was a crime wave in the United States beginning in 2020. Crime has gone up. Illegals are involved in crime. So are natural born citizens, who are apparently more likely to be criminals than illegal aliens, who may want to not do so much because they don't want to get on the radar of, governments and things like that. But there is a crime wave, and people who are not in this country legally, when they commit crimes, there is some special quality to that Trump isn't just making up. And the problem is that in 2017, when he said, they're destroying our country, or this is, if you don't have borders, you don't have a country, that may or may not be true. But people did not feel, I think, the effects of immigration in terms of their feelings of existential safety. A lot of people may have thought that jobs were being taken and that sort of thing. But something changed between 2020 and 2020.
The number of immigrants changed.
Well,
millions and millions of people.
The largest amount since ever in our
history.
Ever.
That's what changed.
So literally historic amount.
But if that had happened at a time of public peace, let's say, or like enforcement of the laws, people were there. That wasn't the case here, though. You could say that was necessarily not the case, because not enforcing immigration law is a form itself of antinomianism that was going to have far-reaching consequences and might give people an idea that they were free to do whatever it was that they wanted to do. But the public does not feel safe. And when you start, and that is not a partisan opinion.
But
that is not partisan. Like, that's why 60 to 70% of the public now favors mass deportation, which is a pretty astounding shift over a 20-year period. Like, something that probably 10% of people would have said they were for in 2005, and it's now 2025, and close to 2/3 of the American people say that there should be mass deportations.
For the liberals freaking out about it, they've gotten very, very accustomed to illegal immigration and border security problems. They've gotten very used to that as a topic to discuss, to argue over, to pontificate. It's an issue. The idea that you were supposed to do something about it has thrown them into a panic. The action is like the craziest. It's sort of like where we all are on say Social Security reform. Like when something happens to that, it was never supposed. It was inconceivable that something's going to actually happen on it.
I think it's also because many of the people who are at the forefront of opposing the deportation policy, the wall policy, they're insulated from the effects of the open border from the past 4 years. So you think about it the same way that they've been insulated from the effects of the inflation. People, because the Democratic Party has realigned to this highly educated or high levels of college attainment, they're not so educated in many cases, affluent party, they didn't have to feel the inflation in the same way that the middle and working classes felt the inflation. And when you have mass migration to the extent that we've had over 4 years, the affluent and protected don't feel the consequences. There was a report out about Fairfax County Public Schools yesterday. That's the school system where I graduated from at high school. It was known as the best public school system in the country when I attended. It's now running huge, huge deficits because of the money it has to spend on ESL, on English as a second language, as a result of the migration. So the people I'm going to wager who are saying this is anti-humanitarian, this is cruel of Trump, we need to oppose what Trump is doing at every cost, I bet a lot of them send their kids to private schools. So they don't feel the brunt. And it's the same in housing. It's again and again and again. And it shows you the cocooning of the Democratic Party that's taken place over the past half decade.
Can I just add, this is such an important point because it actually speaks to a broader theme throughout American history that I think we're seeing a resurgence of now. And that's that when your political class becomes an elite, and that includes the left and the right, when you have a lot of people in the political class who are elite and removed from the everyday life of ordinary Americans. I'm not saying every politician is, but in general, if you have an elite class, a technocratic elite, they forget how pragmatic the American people can be. And the idea that if there's a huge problem and the people vote in someone who's like, I have these 3 things on my list to take care of that as a solution, they're going to choose that person and they're going to set aside any qualms they have about anything else. That pragmatism, that deeply rooted pragmatism, has been repurposed and called hate by the left. Oh, they hate immigrants, they hate people. And there are plenty of people who are racist and terrible, but most Americans have a very pragmatic approach to solving problems. It is what it's made our country very strong, less prone to revolutionary outbreaks, and more likely to get things done. And I think this should be a reminder to Trump that he needs to keep tapping into the pragmatic response that American people have rather than the more ideological response, because he'll get more done tapping into that pragmatism.
There was a term for what Matt was describing, right? Your school system can stink because it's fine and fulfill, and so because it fulfills political and ideological priors for a bunch of people because they don't have skin in the game. They pay the extra tax and send their kids to private school. This was limousine liberalism. This is where the term limousine liberalism came in the 1960s and 1970s and had enormous political effects, positive political effects for the right in the United States as opposed to the limousine liberals of the left. Politically, affirmative action, which was a classic case, busing was I think the signature classic case, which is the idea that your kid, instead of walking 10 minutes to their local school, is going to get on a bus and be driven half an hour to another school in a different neighborhood with people who were not the people that you wanted them necessarily to associate with because you lived where you lived, because it was where your parents lived and where your grandparents lived, and you wanted your kids in this kind of network cocoon. But no, a larger purpose was being imposed upon you and your children. Busing was insanely unpopular, despite what happened between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the 2019 debate, where she said, busing was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, which of course is, I'm sure, absolutely not true. But it was when there was a kind of riot against busing or the construction of low-income housing in middle and upper middle-class neighborhoods in urban cities, or things like that.
Or the crime wave.
and the crime wave as the ultimate example of this, and the idea being
and the college degree getting out of the draft and then turning against the war. A lot of people who didn't go to college, who did fight in Vietnam, were very incensed at that as well.
Right. So you take all that together and you say, I understand people. I'm talking about stuff that happened half a century ago. Many people who were involved in public life have either were not alive, have no memory of it, have no experience of it. But I do, and I'm telling you that the similarities are absolutely jaw-dropping in terms of the tone, which is kind of, what? You can't say that. What do you mean illegal aliens are bad? They're not bad. This is the promise of America. And you're a racist for thinking what you're thinking.
Think about the language change that the Trump administration had to make. Within the Biden administration, for the past 4 years, they have been referring to illegal immigrants as non-citizens. And now the new team has reverted back to the classic legal terminology, illegal alien. But the presumption that the millions and millions of people who have entered this country through the southern border beginning in 2021 are simply non-citizens, implying that one day soon they will become citizens, is itself a completely ideologized take on this issue. And I also want to emphasize
no human being is illegal. Like that was in the 20s, in the 2020 election. That was kind of like a mantra,
right? And
no human being is illegal,
and that comes out of the law schools. And you began seeing it around the year 2000. Is when the left is so obsessed with language. That's when they began changing the language and the appropriate terms to use to describe this. I also think what you bring up about the 2020 debate between what happened in 2019 between Harris and Biden on the issue of busing is extremely important, because when Biden came out against busing early in his Senate career, he was right, and he was on the side of public opinion. And what happened when he became president, finally, almost 50 years later? He joined the left-wing side. He became de facto Kamala's views on a whole variety of issues. And look at the consequences. And so the story is not just kind of the persistence of limousine liberalism. It's also the change in the Democratic Party that has left it at this impasse.
And there's a toothlessness to the response. That's what strikes me. Again, in wild contrast to 2017, how many people came out to the airports when Trump announced the Muslim ban? Tens of thousands? I mean, it may have been more than that.
Well, there were also people stuck at the airports, which made it even crazier, right?
Yeah. Okay. So there was a real sense that, Trump was going too far. Yeah, he ran on things and he talked about things and all of that. But, when he came, when all is said and done, government changes incrementally, policies change incrementally. He didn't want to do that. He tried. He like swung for the fences in his very first week, right? And they were ready for him. And oddly enough, boy, should they be ready for him now. Like, it's been 8 years. He was leading in the presidential race from March of 2024 until November. The issue had bite. The polling showed it had bite and all of that. And all they can do is basically say, you can't say that. What was it that the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, D.C. said in her speech, in her yelling at Trump on Tuesday? It was like, have mercy on these poor people. They're like mowing our lawns. Have mercy on them.
And she is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but she is, especially if we trust what Homans and other administration officials have said about this initial roundup of about 308
350
people. These are murderers. These are child rapists. These are not the kind of people who should be shown any mercy whatsoever, regardless of their immigration status. And they are lumping them all together simply because they broke the law by crossing the border. They're all put in this group of sort of, near saints who should be protected because no human being is illegal. It enrages me because that is not appropriate. There has to be some distinction made.
I think there are two categories of progressives here who are opposing this. on the one hand, I think you have the Limousine liberals who don't know, they haven't quite grasped that they're in the minority on the issue. And then you have the ones who have, which then leads them to the determination that they're living in a fascist country. A madness has seized the rest of the country because this is what people want. There's never any actual reckoning with public opinion.
Well, unless you're Richie Torres or John Fetterman.
Right.
Right.
And I think it's important what Christine said about pragmatism and what Trump is doing and why this is important, because going to the birthright citizenship matter, like I say, that is a radical idea that has been promulgated for the last 25 years by a set of radical conservative legal thinkers who are using creative left-wing style interpretive methods of getting at a result that they want through the courts, led by this guy John Eastman, saying, oh, look, no, actually it was never supposed to be this way, da 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 da. And that I don't know that there's support for. However, arresting criminals and throwing them out of the country, not only is there 60%, I'm sure there's 90% support for that. Like, say to any human being, this is where I started getting tripped up on being a total immigration dove in the 2000s, which is, I would say, look, I'm a dove on immigrant. I'm a Jew. You know, if my family hadn't been allowed to come in, I wouldn't be here today. The Jewish people wouldn't have survived, all of that. And they're like, well, your people came in legally. How does that justify people coming across the border in the United States illegally and then receiving social services and their children becoming sick? Like, how do those two connect? Your family didn't trigger this rule, and then I can say, well, the Restrictive Act in 1924 prevented a lot of Jews from coming into the United States who could have come in. Millions could have been saved by that. And then they could say, well, okay, but it was the law of the land. You don't get to pick and choose what laws of the land are enforced and what are not enforced. That's what it means to live in a democratic republic. And they were right. Like, my emotions were very much engaged in the idea that I had a moral responsibility in some ways to support immigration, or the idea that, immigrants were a net benefit to the country and that America is the greatest place on earth and we need to house people who can't make a future for themselves, and they will be a net supporter to the country. And then others would say, well, I'm sorry, that's the laws say something else. Change the laws to the way you want them if you can, but you can't ignore them. And there is this huge policy of ignoring the law, particularly when it came to certain types of agricultural, how much sectors of our economy relied upon this workforce. And it was something that I myself had to reckon with, and that now, all these liberal groups and stuff had to reckon with. And of course, they also have billions of dollars in support from NGOs and progressive billionaires and all of that.
From the left wings are
oligarchs. Oligarchy, right. That do say that no one is illegal and that blah, blah, blah. But however you want to slice it. And I just think that when you see a political movement or a political section of the United States starting to make an argument that is weak because they've never tested the quality of their argument against either the real world or in an actual electoral setting, and it just got tested in the most basic way, right? A guy said, this is what I think, and here's what I'm going to do. And he won, and now he is going to implement what he won. And I was listening to Matt's and my favorite hate listen of the morning, Up First from NPR, and they have those formulations, which is like, many are saying,
yes,
that this is going to make life there are going to be many questions
Okay,
about.
this
I'm
explains
glad
your
you brought this
peevishness.
up, though,
I
John.
get this
Thank
now.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought this up because I didn't listen this morning, but I did listen the other day, and I would like to propose a new executive order for the president to sign. And this order would ban public radio employees from using the foreign language pronunciation of foreign capitals. So that if you are, and according to this executive order, the Continental Order, if you work for NPR PBS, when you say Nicaragua, you are forbidden from saying Nicaragua. You cannot roll your R's and have the tongue going in every direction. That would be illegal for institutions receiving taxpayer funds. End of proposal.
Charles Krauthammer, the late our beloved Charles Krauthammer, wrote an entire piece
Yes.
about this, that there was in the New Republic 30 years ago, that one of the signposts, one of the ways socially, culturally, that you could tell where somebody was from was whether they insisted on pronouncing foreign names of places as though they were from those places.
Yes.
Right. So, and Nicaragua was his at the
time it was the Contras and the Sandinistas.
Yeah, Pacifica Radio or whatever. Nicaragua.
Yeah. But it was all over. It's all over NPR now with the immigration debate.
Yeah, it is. And of course, so I think it's a wonderful executive order. I don't think that it could be properly enforced.
Well, it's a taxpayer subsidized organization.
Many of these things are going to fail. Now, one thing that is not going to fail are almost all of Donald Trump's cabinet nominations. That became very clear over the course of the last month. There are 53 Republican senators get the vote to the floor. With the maybe possible exception of RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, everybody is going to get confirmed. That seems now like of the cabinet nominees.
RFK has a hearing scheduled January 29th. And my rule of thumb has been once your hearing is scheduled and you make it through, you're likely to get confirmed. Interestingly enough, Tulsi Gabbard's hearing has not been scheduled.
Right. That is an important proviso because the classic rule of thumb is that when a cabinet nomination is going to fail, the person gets out before that can happen. That's what happened with Matt Gaetz. It's what happened with Zoe Baird. It's what happened with, I don't know, Linda Chavez. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who were nominated for cabinet posts who never got to their hearing because their hearing was going to be a failure, and it's a huge embarrassment to, of course, be voted down by the Senate. So you think RFK, but I'm just saying with the except now, so that leaves Gabbard. However, Matt, what is happening with the nominations? Marco Rubio has been confirmed.
Marco Rubio was confirmed on the first day of the Trump administration.
Unanimously.
Unanimously.
I mean, it was two senators did not participate.
He went to the State Department. He is already making changes. He, of course, ruled that the only flag to be flown at U.S. diplomatic installations is the American flag, the Stars and Stripes. No politicized flags like the BLM flag or the trans flag. He has played a part in redesignating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. The president signed that into order, working with his national security advisor, Mike Waltz. But Rubio also is supportive of that. He has made calls. He's called several Latin American leaders. He met with the Quad. He met with the foreign ministers of India, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. That's the four members of the four. I'm going to check that. So he's doing the job. Oh, no, we're the fourth member of the Quad. I'm sorry. It's not a quintet. It's the U.S., Australia, India, and Japan, the Quad. But he's the only one. He's the only one. In fact, in Trump's first term, he had more cabinet secretaries confirmed at this point than he does 8 years later, having won the popular vote, having had not a single member of Congress challenge the certification of his election, enjoying his highest popularity ever. Rubio is the only confirmed member of the Trump cabinet. And the question is why? And it's clear
technically,
that,
Senate rules say that
Yes.
any senator, this is a weird Senate custom, any senator can delay the vote of anything for a week.
Yes.
Can put a hold
Gum up the
on
works.
anything,
Yep.
a nomination, a piece of legislation, anything. One senator out of 100 can do this. And so that has now been done in the cases of, as we know,
Of everyone.
right? That has
It's
had a
insane.
hearing, right? So Pam Bondi was supposed to be the Attorney General. John Ratcliffe.
Can I talk about Ratcliffe for a second? Because here's Ratcliffe. He's been a member of Congress. He was already confirmed by the United States Senate as Trump's DNI, Director of National Intelligence, in the first term. And yet, as Tom Cotton pointed out on the floor of the U.S. Senate the other day, the Democrats in the Senate, who are in the minority, are preventing a vote on John Ratcliffe's nomination. This is hampering the ability of America's national security agencies to do their job, to protect us from foreign threats. And it is out of spite. It is out of spite. And it's the same thing happened. The same thing is the case with Bondi. The same thing is the case with Besant. I mean, Besant's going to get, he's going to get 60 votes easily. He'll probably get higher than 60 votes. I mean, the guy is amazing. But it is simply out of spite that they are delaying these. And so the response from the Senate leadership, the Republican leadership, is fine. We're going to work through the weekend. We're going to stay here, cancel your flights, because if this is the way the Democrats want to proceed, then we're going to have to go through these one by one, late at night, into the weekend votes. And that, of course, that leaves Hegseth, right, who should be confirmed by now as defense secretary. His nomination was reported out of committee on a party line vote, but he won the vote in the committee. And that is also being delayed now, perhaps into this coming weekend. And their Democrats are engaged in a one last minute attempt to sink the nomination through this report in NBC News of an affidavit signed by his former sister-in-law, who, and this is very confusing to me.
Yes.
Because I'm always obsessed with who is an in-law. Do you know what I mean? Are your in-laws the siblings of your spouse, or are they also the spouses
You're not the
of the siblings of your spouse?
Yes. Technically, it's just the person. It's the
yes.
If your wife has a brother or sister, they are your in-laws.
They are your brother-in-law, but the spouses are not. And this lady is a divorced spouse of Hegseth's brother.
Right.
So she's not. I don't know what she is.
The woman at issue issued a statement. This is the wife who was supposedly attacked. Said flat out, "This is a lie. This is not true."
This is Hegseth's second wife. Yes.
The second wife said this is
second
not
wife's. It was her. It's her ex sister.
In-law.
Well, yes. Where's the connection? Because it's even more confusing because the ex-wife of Hegseth's brother kept the Hegseth name.
Yes.
So this is why it got confusing when I was reading the allegations. I go, hold it, who was this person married to, and what is the? Yeah.
Well, you know what they say.
Not only has the yes.
Believe all ex-in-laws.
That's the new slogan.
Not only has Hegseth's second ex-wife,
yes,
said it's not true, she is lawyering up to sue her brother's ex-wife. She's lawyering up.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is Cotton and others are saying, you're saying it's out of spite. I think that there is a kind of desperate Hail Mary quality here, which is activist groups are saying to Democratic senators, just buy us a week. Just buy us a week so we can see if we can like get some dirt on some of these guys. You know, we haven't We haven't yet, but if you just give us another 7 days, we're out there. God knows what Soros money can do. If Soros money is directed in the right, if the fire hose is sprayed.
Well, I think it came up short in this case with the affidavit.
Well, not according to Jane Mayer.
Can I just add
that's what I have to say?
That's revelatory.
If there's character assassination somewhere, Jane Mayer's name is going to be right there with it.
But this is an important shift, actually, I think, what's happening with this attempt at a late hit on Hegseth. And that's that the machine that the left in particular has tried to use for decades and decades against any Republican nominee, whether they're to the Supreme Court or to the cabinet, it's breaking down in real time. You can see it happening because as soon as this came out, there were alternative outlets where the wife in question could go and say, no, this isn't happening. This is wrong. And they still ran the story. And
she told the mainstream outlet.
Yes.
The story. Yeah. This is ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah. And they wrote the story.
And I don't. Yeah. So I think the thing with Hegseth is you kind of know what you're getting at this point. We had the confirmation hearing. The questions about his personal behavior were litigated in the hearing. He made the point that most of it is based on anonymous sourcing. We know his resume. We've discussed his resume on the podcast many times. He doesn't have the typical resume of a Secretary of Defense, typically someone who spent a long career in business or government. And more recently, probably to our detriment, we've had generals in that position. But we know that. So it's kind of, if you're either going to say, okay, we're going to need you to roll the dice with Pete Hegseth. He's going to bring an interesting, very different perspective to the Department of Defense. He's going to focus on kind of restoring what he calls the warrior ethos and improving recruitment and Secretary of Defense. Or you say, he's just not up for the job. Either case, have the vote. Have the vote.
So Hegseth's nominated. I read his 2 books the weekend after his nomination. They're more interesting than I expected. I thought they were going to be kind of classic ghost-written Fox News argle-bargle. There's a lot of material in there about the degradation of the military by ideologized cultural policy that is well argued, well sourced, and to my mind, very frightening. I will also say this, and I don't want to it's name drop. It's not name dropping precisely, but let me just put it this way. So Hegseth is nominated. Tom Cotton, our friend Tom Cotton, who is in fact our friend. Tom is a veteran, right? I mean, he served in Iraq, he served in Afghanistan in combat positions. The status of our military and the conduct of our military is a matter of supreme importance to him. And I have, his level of outrage at the treatment of Hegseth. He is the kind of person who could have torpedoed Hegseth's nomination. He's in good with Trump. He could have said, I'm sorry, I can't in conscience support this. He's not good enough for this job. This is the most important job in the U.S. government or something like that. Not only didn't he have that attitude, but when the left started coming at Hegseth, he got very, very angry. And I think it's also important to note that Joni Ernst, there was all this idea, Joni Ernst, a 17-year veteran, there was the idea Joni Ernst is going to say no. The way he talks about women in the military or what roles they should play in the military, she will never accept this, and this could really be a problem for his nomination. And she talked to him, she listened to him, and maybe Trump scared her. I don't know. Who cares? There's we're going to send Carrie Lake into Iowa to run against. She said, okay, this is fine with me. So what we have here is the military wing of the Senate, of Republicans in the Senate, who could have said, I'm sorry.
Well, and Roger Wicker, the chair of SASC, the Senate Armed Services Committee, he is fully behind Hegseth too.
Yeah.
And I think you raised an important point because it relates to what's going on with the Gabbard nomination, Tulsi Gabbard for DNI. there was a moment, remember, in December when it looked like Hegseth's nomination was on the rocks. The accusations about his past behavior were roiling the media. Ernst was wavering. Remember, the Republicans can only afford to lose 3 senators. What happened? Hegseth decided, he told Trump, I'm going to fight for this. Before you pull my nomination and nominate Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, for DOD, I'm going to fight for this. And Hegseth launched a public relations campaign where he got in front of the cameras, he rebutted the allegations, and he got MAGA world behind him to support him as well. And he saved his nomination. And he most likely he will be confirmed by the Senate sometime by the end of the weekend. Gabbard, it now seems, according to press reports, is facing the same challenge. And Trump is communicating to her, this is based on the fake news media, so take it for what you will. You're going to have to do a Pete. If you want to save yourself, you're going to have to do a Pete. And the question, I think, is Tulsi Gabbard capable of doing the type of full-bore public relations communications campaign in defense of her nomination that Pete Hegseth clearly is?
And
I'm sorry, but her issue is also not a personal one. It's a judgment call related to the work she's being nominated to do. And that's, did you hang out for a couple of hours with Assad in Syria? And what did you talk about? And what did that mean? And actually having to explain that to a very skeptical American public, to say nothing of the Senate.
Yeah, and why did you oppose Donald Trump's Iran policy when he was president?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very interesting about Gabbard, because one of the reasons that a guy like Hegseth can rally Republicans to his side is that he's a Republican. Tulsi Gabbard got famous because she ran for president as a Democrat. She was a Democratic congressman running from the left on foreign policy. That was her issue in 2019. She was very impressive in those debates because she knew her stuff. But the stuff that she knew is so radically dissimilar, not only from conventional Republican ideas about foreign policy, but as Matt indicated, Trump's ideas about foreign policy.
But she has a horseshoe that meets with the extreme isolationist right wing. That's actually the test of her nomination. Yeah.
And by the way, we should make, and so that is the big question: is that enough? Because clearly no vote has been scheduled because she doesn't have the votes.
She changed her tune on Section 702 authority. This is the warrantless surveillance program that, of course, has been the subject of debate in this country for almost 20 years. It was
more than 20 years. Yeah.
Well, it was unveiled in December 06. I think it was. James Risen wrote the thing. So
didn't the enforcement of some part of warrantless wiretapping stuff, wasn't that the famous anecdote where Comey goes to James Comey, who was then
the hospital bed story?
Goes to the hospital bed to get John Ashcroft to do X, Y, and Z relating to. So it's more than 20 years.
Well, but I think that was part of Risen. Yeah, I mean, it was implemented right after 9/11, but right. James Risen exposed it against the wishes of the United States government, I think in 2005 or 6.
So whatever. So it's 19 years, 21 years.
We've been arguing about it. And she was always an opponent of it because, of course, the FISA system was abused against Trump and the Trump campaign operatives in 2016. So, but she's all against it. She has recently changed her mind, according to accounts of her meetings with senators, and said that this is an important tool to use against terrorists. But is she saying that publicly? I think it's interesting. What Hegseth did was, I'm going to open up the process, and I'm going to talk to you, and I'm going to say, and I'm going to be on social media, and I'm going to say to the cameras, all of these things are lies. I'm ready to do my job. I'm going to go on Megyn Kelly and say I'm not going to drink if I'm the Secretary of Defense. We're not really getting that from Gabbard. Right. You see her next to, by the way, the Chinese vice president at the inauguration.
Yeah.
But you don't have that argument, and that I think that's what's going to be necessary if she finally gets the job.
I think she'll make it, by the way. I say this not as someone who wants that to happen, but the thing about the Trump right is they accept late converts of all sorts. The forgiveness of sins is perpetual, and if you can, and she historically does a good job of
Okay,
explaining herself and who she
but
is.
in the horseshoe that Christine talked about, those views, opposition to warrantless wiretapping, her general isolationist foreign policy opinions and all of that, that's not a late convert thing. The people who want her, not just
Mhm.
Trump, who wants her because she was a Democrat who endorsed him, and then people, but Tucker, people like that, they, this is not late
Right.
conversion. This is what they want the Republican Party. They want the horseshoe to come full
They
circle.
are the converts
They
to that
want
view. Yeah.
section, they don't,
Right.
they are mad at her, is my guess, for saying that she supports Section 702. They think that Section 702 is the devil, is the worst thing. This is the Glenn Greenwald, Edward Snowden right. Like, and that's a real thing. That's not, just so, the politics here are kind of complicated. And it is one thing. It appears that when people fight for themselves by being willing to say, as Hegseth was, what they're saying about me personally is a lie. It is not true that I molested people or I did this or that. It is not prove it. Prove it or shut up, which is essentially what Kavanaugh did when
Right.
at the unbelievable character assassination assault on him. And we were there. We watched this the day of his hearing, where Christine Blasey Ford testified in the morning and said, "Oh, and I was in this house, and I was on a bed, and it was blah blah blah." And then it was over. And then at lunchtime, everybody was like, "Well, Kavanaugh's finished. He's totally done. You can't survive this." And then he came out after lunch and said, "She is destroying my life. My life is now ruined, but everything she said is a lie. I'm going to prove it to you right now, even though I know that I have no hope." And then he brought out those notebooks and he said, "My dad always said to keep a calendar. And guess what? I have a calendar of every moment that I lived that week, that month that she said this might have happened. She doesn't know where it happened. She doesn't know when it happened. You want to see where I was? At 3:00, I was at soccer practice. At 5:00, I was an
She couldn't
altar boy
manage to define
service."
the year. I mean, she was
Right.
kind of hazy
Yeah.
on what year it happened.
And
So yeah.
then, like 2 hours later, Kavanaugh is done, right? Kavanaugh's in, and about 3 or 4 days later, Susan Collins gets up on the floor of the Senate and says, "I will support him because I believe I not only is are his accomplishments remarkable, but I believe what he said to be true." So Gabbard doesn't have that, and Hegseth kind of did that, or he said, "Look, my
Well,
life is very complicated, and I feel bad about what I'm not going to drink."
Hegseth had his West Point acceptance, which is
Right.
another example of like document everything if you hope to be in politics
Yeah.
and you're on the right. But
Right.
she took that trip.
Yes.
She did
But
state
that's
that
what
she
I'm
thinks
saying.
Edward Snowden should be released. I mean,
She
she has a
doesn't
record
have,
that she
right.
has to defend.
She has a record, and people aren't coming at her with character assassination untruths that then become self-discrediting. Because if the idea is, look, if you want to oppose the guy because you think his ideas on law are noxious, that is your right as an American, as a senator. Nothing in the rules, nothing, it says advise and consent. It doesn't say you have to agree on policy or disagree, or the person needs to be a person of low moral character. You can say no for any reason if you are a senator to any nominee that comes before you. There are no limits, just like there are no limits to the pardon power. But if you're doing it and you're using character assassination, that may boomerang on you. That really may be problematic. And every time we see a Republican fight really hard for their lives, and I would say Clarence Thomas was the sort of the example of this, right? He had this sort of the hours of Anita Hill and this and that, and he got up and he said, "This is a high-tech lynching," and he dared the Democrats, who were in the majority in the Senate, he dared them to vote against him. He said, "None of this happened." And then came, and there was Jane Mayer, the character, the fraudulent character assassin, with her dear friend Jill Abramson, writing books showing that Clarence Thomas supposedly, and none of it, it's all he said, she said. He said it didn't happen, and they weren't willing in the end to use that as the sole reason that they were going to vote against him as a nominee. This is a very effective counter-assault method, but she doesn't have it at her disposal. That's
just one final point, and that is when Biden was president in 2021, Democrats controlled the Senate by a narrower margin than Republicans do today. 50-50.
So the vice president had to break.
And yet his cabinet secretaries were being confirmed at the normal clip.
Right.
And so the next time this situation was reversed and there's a Democratic president with the Democratic Senate trying to fill out his cabinet, I would hope Republicans say, all right, this is how it feels, and just do the same thing.
I mean, that's dangerous, right? That's the problem here. That's why I say I think that they're only doing it, again, to buy their donors a week's time to find, a gas station attendant who would say that Scott Bessent made a pass at him or something like that.
That's insane. And stories come up when people are already in the offices, as happened during the first Trump administration. But it just seems to me like a completely spiteful, this is the only lever of power we have. And so we're just going to make it as miserable as we can for you. And it's clearly not going to work. It's just going to take longer for these nominees to be confirmed. And also, by the way, the longer it takes, the more you're going to hear Trump say to the congressional leadership, as he did during their meeting the other day, just go into recess. Just go into recess. And he's going to revive that idea he had originally after the election of just the Senate would just simply go into recess and he would appoint 1,400 people to positions. And, I think just, again, look at how, if you want to protect that norm that says, no, the Senate should have a role in confirming these, why delay and trash someone like Ratcliffe and someone like Bessent and someone like Bondi? It makes no sense.
But those aside, I think it's not pure spite. I think they look at Gabbard and Hegseth and they say, this is so target rich. You're telling me we can't find something? Give us a little time. There's got to be a credible claim somewhere that could sink some of these people.
I want to do a quick update since we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard and and this sort of caucus, the horseshoe caucus of sort of right-wing isolationists. I wanted just a quick update on something we talked about yesterday, which Michael Domino sworn in, not a confirmable position, as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at the Pentagon with responsibility for the Middle East. And every 3 hours yesterday, things were being dug up about this guy, Mr. Domino. The latest is on the responsiblestatecraft.org website run by the Quincy Institute, to which he was contributing. And it's very notable, by the way, that website and an earlier one that he wrote for, which was called Defense Priorities, was hysterically scrubbing.
Yes, I mentioned that yesterday. They've been doing it since the minute his name came to me attention.
Yes. Well,
people have saved his tweets too, by the way, which is worth going back and looking over.
So one thing that he happened to say in the middle of last year, by the way, I believe, Glenn Greenwald. Again, let us just point out Glenn Greenwald is the handmaiden of one of the most traitorous acts in American history, which was the Edward Snowden exposure of, much of America's defense secrets in 2011.
And let me point out, there's no relation.
No relation to Abe. That's right. No relation to Abe. That he said, quote, the Abraham Accords left out the issue of Israel-Palestine And I think that's a massive mistake. This is Michael Domino. That was largely done because people thought that's the thorniest issue, that we could set it aside and solve 80% of the rest of the equation, but it doesn't work that way. This conflict is so central to the region, you really can't address any kind of long-term political arrangements in the Gulf or the Middle East without also addressing it. So he is a believer
Linkage
in the idea that that peace in the Middle East runs through Israel-Palestine. Linkage, as you say, is the name.
Thank you, John Kerry. John Kerry is working in Trump's Pentagon.
Yeah, these guys are pulling off the shelf any argument they can because Trump and the Trump administration, the first administration, cut through the Gordian knot of Middle East stasis by saying, we're going to ignore this and see what happens if we try to make policy without saying there has to be a solution to the Palestinian state problem along with everything else or before everything else. And it turned out to be wildly successful, and he is still standing in opposition to it, thereby effectively endorsing some of the terms of the more ridiculous elements of the Hamas Israel ceasefire deal, which is the third stage, which of course will never be reached, where this is somehow going to get resolved, which is to say it's not going to get resolved. But he has been put in place. There's a story in Jewish Insider this morning that the person who has been sort of spearheading this effort with the assumption that these guys are all going to work for Elbridge Colby, the fake interventionist in the himself, maybe a key isolationist figure on the right, in my opinion, who has been made head of policy planning at the Defense Department. That is a confirmable position. He has not been confirmed yet. That Dan Caldwell who works for the Kochs and has been the person who has been helping White House personnel with these appointments. And now that these appointments, people like Domino and others have made it clear that they opposed Trump one foreign policy in many of its particulars. I wonder, remember, we were talking about cabinet secretaries and confirmations. If Elbridge Colby is pre-positioning people at the Pentagon who stand in opposition to Trump's foreign policy successes in his first term, again, are you giving Republicans in the Senate a grounds on which to turn his nomination down? Because he is in fact not serving as a good Trump soldier. He may be serving as a good Tucker Carlson soldier, and maybe as a good, Donald Trump Jr. soldier, but he is not serving as a good Donald Trump Sr. soldier. So that is one to watch. What happens?
Well, you just wonder what Mr. Domino thought of Trump's executive order redesignating the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization. You would want to think that people would be on the same page policy-wise. That's often not the case in any administration, but this is pretty flagrant to have this deputy assistant secretary have a view so contrary to Trump's Middle East policy right now.
And in domestic policy terms, by the way, I mean, we know that so much effort is being expended to make sure that people who have even whispered or hinted at disagreements with Trump policy get nowhere near an administration job, right? The personnel stuff that is going on here where Trump said, if you worked for Bolton, if you worked for this one, if you worked for that one, you are not getting a job in our administration.
But
but that's all domestic.
But now, you can't with Trump, you can't err on the interventionist side. You can err on the isolationist side.
So far.
Yeah.
But you think Trump isn't proud of the Abraham Accords? He's very proud of the Abraham Accords. I don't think he wants people in his administration who think the Abraham Accords are bad.
Well, maybe one reason that the Koch sites are scrubbing that material is the sense that, oops, Mr. Domino will be in this position, but actually the policy will be slightly different, and we don't want to make that contrast visible. Though, of course, the Eagle Eyes, a Jewish Insider, were the first to expose it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I am going to announce, as having seen this now, one of the more hilarious events of the Oscar nominations, which did take place, were announced while we were doing the podcast, which is that there is this movie, Amelia Perez, which you could only see on Netflix. It got 13 nominations. This movie, no human being has finished watching Amelia Perez. I now challenge you.
Ooh, we could make it part of the
Go to
commentary
Netflix
drinking game, right?
and
if
The-
you
the
finish
left-
it, you get a
get
drink.
see if you can get all the way through Amelia Perez, which is a movie of such sustained awfulness that it has only been chosen because it centers on a trans figure, but not just any trans figure. The question that is raised by Amelia Perez is this: what if El Chapo got it with gender affirmation surgery, and becoming a woman, then becomes a social justice warrior? Now that El Chapo no longer has to live up to the toxic masculinity that was his.
Estrogen is a powerful drug, people. Powerful drug.
I think
That
the
is
lesson
literally
is
the plot of Amelia Perez.
the theme of this podcast is
Yes,
they just don't get it.
they just don't get
Well,
it.
this is why. Wait, can I make the recommendation then?
Yes,
Since
please.
it's not Amelia Perez.
Yes,
Abe the Good Greenwald's newsletter. This should be today's recommendation.
yes. Abe the Good Greenwald and his newsletter, top banner, commentary.org, right there in the middle. Click on newsletter, fill in your name, fill in your email address, and it will land in your mailbox every afternoon. So that is our recommendation. I am amused at the 13 nominations of Amelia Perez, which may win one, but I don't think it's going to win any more than one. Zoe Saldana may win for Best Supporting Actress. Not going to win anything else, but it's pretty funny anyway, because no one has watched it all the way through. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe, the newsletter writer, Christine, the social commentator. So, geez, that's really bad of me. And the Washington commentator, Matthew Continetti. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor. Keep the candle burning.